They thought shoving me into the basement would break me. One day, I woke to find my bed gone, replaced by a thin mattress on cold, damp concrete. The smell of mildew filled the air, the light flickered like it was mocking me, and my own family laughed as if this was some kind of joke. "We're making room upstairs," they said, as if my life could be shuffled around like furniture. But I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I just watched. Because sometimes, the person you push down is the one who will rise higher than you ever imagined. I sat on that thin mattress, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and footsteps above me, the life I'd built now reduced to shadows and dripping pipes. Every thud from upstairs felt like a punch, every slammed door a reminder that I was invisible. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and old wood. My hands rested on the concrete floor, cold and rough, as if the house itself was mocking me. I tried to make sense of it. "We're just making room," my daughter had said, as if my years of care, my sweat, my love for this home were worth nothing. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed, flickering across the water stains on the ceiling. The walls, once filled with memories, now felt like prison bars. I could hear my grandson's footsteps thundering down the hall, his sneakers echoing with careless joy, completely oblivious to the humiliation he helped deliver. Meals were left at the top of the stairs, a cruel gesture of independence that reminded me I was now secondary in my own home. I reached for my old blanket, the one my wife had sewn decades ago, trying to cling to some comfort, but it barely warmed me. My reflection in the tiny basement window was pale, tired, but angry, quiet, simmering anger. I clenched my fists and stared at the ceiling. "You think this is the end?" I whispered to myself. "You think shoving me down here makes you stronger? You have no idea how far I can rise." The basement was cold, dark, and suffocating, but it was also my incubator. And from here, I would plan a reckoning they would never forget. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to hear from you. What would you do if your own family treated you like this? Would you scream, fight back, or plan something quietly? Comment below, because I promise this isn't just a story about me. It's about anyone who's ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or ignored. And if you think I should teach them a lesson they'll never forget, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, because I've got more stories where the tables turn, and trust me, they'll wish they never crossed me. I wasn't always the man who could sit quietly in a basement and plot an entire household's downfall. There was a time when this house wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. I built it with my own hands, brick by brick, nail by nail, pouring every bit of sweat I had into these walls. My wife and I dreamed of a home filled with laughter, smells of fresh bread, and the constant chatter of children running through the halls. Those days, the house wasn't just a shelter. It was the heartbeat of our family. I remember waking before dawn, the cold floor beneath my bare feet, the smell of coffee brewing as I prepared breakfast for my wife and children. We didn't have much, but what we had, we made with love. I taught my kids to ride bikes, to respect hard work, to be honest even when it was difficult. I took them fishing, camping, building memories that I thought would last a lifetime. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every late-night story under a flickering lamp, I was there. I gave them everything I could, and I never expected anything in return. That was my mistake. Life wasn't always easy. I remember long nights working 2 jobs to keep the house running, repairing the roof when storms tore it apart, shoveling snow until my back ached. Friends would joke that I had a second home in the hardware store, and maybe they were right. But even through exhaustion, I found joy in small things. My wife's laughter, the sound of my children learning to play the piano, the smell of my home after a storm passed. It was all worth it. And yet, somewhere along the way, that gratitude disappeared. My children grew into adults who took my presence for granted. They forgot the countless nights I stayed awake when they were sick, the meals I cooked, the advice I gave freely, the money I saved to help them through college. I watched quietly as they moved through the world, confident and entitled, treating this home, and me, as nothing more than a backdrop for their lives. I can still remember the first subtle signs of disregard. My daughter, once full of warmth, started making offhand comments. "You're so slow, Dad. Why do you worry so much?" Even my son, the one I thought would always have my back, began dismissing my opinions. "Old man, that's not how the world works now," he'd say, rolling his eyes as I spoke. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself they didn't mean harm, that it was the natural drift of generations. But the drift became a shove, and the shove became a push I could no longer ignore. I remember the day my grandson, barely out of high school, proudly announced that he was moving my favorite chair to the corner of the living room. "You'll be more comfortable there, Grandpa," he said with a grin. Comfortable? I wanted to tell him the chair had been mine for decades, that it had supported my back through sleepless nights and years of hard labor, that it had witnessed every conversation and every tear shed in this house. But I didn't. I just watched. And I remembered. It wasn't just about furniture or space or comfort. It was about respect. The kind of respect you earn through a lifetime of sacrifice, patience, and love. It was about being seen, being valued, being acknowledged. And suddenly, in one swift wave, it felt as if all that history, all that devotion, had been erased with a shrug and a laugh. The same walls that once echoed with laughter now whispered of betrayal. Even then, I never let them see my anger. I learned early that patience was more powerful than confrontation. You could shout, rage, and fight, but sometimes the quiet observer holds the true power. I watched them, noted their habits, their assumptions, their arrogance. Every careless word, every dismissive action was recorded in the ledger of memory I kept carefully in my mind. I could feel the tide turning, even if they could not. And that brings me to the day they moved me. I woke to unfamiliar hands shoving me, my bed being dragged across the hallway, and the air thick with the scent of wet cement from the basement. They told me it was better for everyone that I sleep down there where it was cooler, quieter, and out of the way. I wanted to scream, to cry, to curse, but I didn't. I understood something they didn't. Power isn't taken. It's preserved, observed, and when the moment is right, reclaimed. As I sat there in the dim basement light, tracing the cracks in the concrete floor with my finger, I realized I had something they didn't. I had history. I had knowledge. I had patience. And I had the truth hidden in old papers, deeds, clauses, overlooked rights, that could turn the entire house into a fortress I controlled. For the first time since I arrived in that basement, I smiled. Not a cruel smile, not yet, but a knowing one. I had been pushed down, yes. Forgotten, dismissed, underestimated? Absolutely, but underestimated is exactly what you want your enemies to feel. And in that silence, in that cold and damp room, I began plotting. Because one day, the basement wouldn't hold me. I would rise, and when I did, they would finally understand what it meant to take me for granted. The days in the basement dragged on, each one longer than the last. At first, I tried to make the space bearable. I arranged the thin mattress neatly, stacked a few books by my side, and even set a small lamp to chase away the gloom. But no matter how much I tried, the sense of being sidelined gnawed at me. And the worst part? They didn't even notice. Meals were left at the top of the stairs, cold, half-eaten, like offerings to someone who no longer mattered. The sounds of life above, the laughter, the TV blaring, the clinking of glasses at dinner, were like salt in an open wound. I could hear them talking about me, planning their weekend outings, joking about my new quarters. One evening, I caught my daughter's voice, loud and mocking, saying, "Well, at least Dad won't get in our way down here." The words sliced through me. My blood boiled, but I stayed silent. I had learned the power of quiet observation. Then came the smaller betrayals, the little humiliations that added up to something more insidious. My son took my favorite tools and stashed them in a closet, claiming they were too dangerous for me. My grandson hid the remote for the old TV I liked, forcing me to climb the stairs every time I wanted a change. Even the neighbors, who had once greeted me warmly, now treated me like a shadow. I was a man erased, not from the street, but from my own home. I began noticing patterns, subtle things at first, the way my children assumed I wouldn't question anything, how they scheduled events deliberately without consulting me, how they treated the house like a game board, and I was a mere pawn. The arrogance was staggering, and yet it revealed their weakness. I also discovered secondary characters who became part of this unfolding drama. The neighbor, Mrs. Patel, came by one afternoon bringing cookies and a concerned smile. She whispered, "I've never seen them treat anyone like this. It's cruel." Even the mailman, who had delivered letters to me for decades, paused with sympathy as he handed me my mail, as if he understood the injustice. Small threads of support, but enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. Every insult, every slight, every underhanded maneuver built the tension in me. I realized they weren't acting out of sheer malice alone. They were motivated by greed, insecurity, and the need to feel powerful. They believed I had no leverage, no options, no way to reclaim the life they had pushed me from, and that belief would be their downfall. One evening, the breaking point arrived. I overheard them laughing over a plan to renovate the upstairs, which would further encroach on my memories and my things. "We can finally get rid of all that old junk," my daughter said, gesturing to items I had cherished for decades. They didn't know I had been cataloging every item, every document, every minor detail of legal ownership. Every laugh, every careless comment only strengthened my resolve. Complications began to mount too. I needed to navigate the legal maze of property rights while keeping my intentions secret. A single misstep, one hint that I was planning a countermove, and they would tighten their grip even further. I had to wait, bide my time, and appear weak while assembling the pieces I would need. Even the dynamics within the household added tension. My son argued with my daughter over trivial matters, and my grandson tried to assert authority he didn't truly have. Each internal conflict they created, unknowingly, became a domino waiting to fall, and I watched, quietly, cataloging weaknesses, predicting outcomes, and sharpening my strategy. At night, I would sit on the cold basement floor and imagine how things could be turned around. The basement, once a symbol of my degradation, became my strategy room. I could see the whole house in my mind, the staircases, the locked doors, the hidden storage rooms, every electrical panel, every legal document I had saved. Each day added a layer to my plan, each insult another brick in the foundation of my revenge. By the time weeks passed, I had learned everything I needed. I knew their schedules, their habits, their assumptions about my incapacity. I had identified every weakness, every overconfidence, every blind spot. The very arrogance that they wore like armor would become the chains that bound them. And yet, I kept it hidden. Not a word betrayed my growing plan. Because in a house full of people who thought they had won, I had discovered a truth they would never expect. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the loudest power, and in the silence of that basement, with the smell of damp concrete and the echo of their laughter above, I realized one thing with perfect clarity. The house, this home, had always been mine. and soon it would be again. I spent the next few weeks in the basement, not sulking, not whining, but observing. Every movement upstairs became part of my mental map. When they laughed over dinner, I noted who came first, who lingered, who left the light on too long. Every careless remark about my new quarters or my supposed uselessness was logged. I realized that patience had been my ally for decades, and now it was about to pay dividends. First, I focused on information. Old deeds, forgotten clauses, mortgage papers, every scrap of legal documentation I had accumulated over the years became a weapon. The house wasn't theirs in the way they thought it was. Every renovation plan, every expense they thought they controlled could be countered, but I needed precision. I could not move hastily. They were reckless, and I would use that against them. I started small. I repaired the basement myself, turning it from a damp, uncomfortable cell into a command center. A bright lamp replaced the flickering fluorescent, and I arranged my tools and papers meticulously. The basement smelled faintly of cedar now, and the quiet gave me space to think. Each night, I would study my notes, map out locks, doorways, and hidden access points. I even made trips to the local county office under the guise of checking minor tax documents, gathering details that no one upstairs suspected I could access. Next, I tested their assumptions. I let them believe I was exhausted, beaten down, and resigned. I groaned when they handed me meals at the top of the stairs. I shuffled slowly when they entered the basement to check on me. I even dropped a few subtle hints of forgetfulness, letting them think my mind was frail. "Oh, I can't remember where I put that paper," I muttered once while they chuckled above, confident I was harmless. Meanwhile, I enlisted quiet allies. Mrs. Patel, the neighbor, became an informal lookout. She would comment casually about deliveries, contractors, and the comings and goings of my family, feeding me small but vital pieces of information. The mailman, sympathetic to my plight, tipped me off to when legal documents arrived, those papers I had been waiting for that would give me leverage. Slowly, the puzzle pieces began to assemble themselves in my mind. I also considered timing. I couldn't act too soon. I needed a moment when their arrogance would be at its peak. I knew they would plan a family gathering soon, a celebration of some trivial success that they had been gloating about for weeks. That was perfect. Their focus would be on themselves, their eyes off me, their egos inflated. That would be my window. But I didn't stop at observation. I began creating small, harmless inconveniences that would condition them for the bigger shock. The upstairs locks were subtly adjusted so that doors creaked ominously when opened. Lights flickered in a few rooms, minor electrical tweaks that seemed like coincidence. Their sense of control started to fray, though they didn't know why. Every step I took made them just a little more uneasy, a little more dependent on routines I understood and controlled. Every day, I rehearsed in my mind the sequence of actions I would take. I visualized myself ascending the stairs, clipboard in hand, asserting legal authority, changing locks, claiming control over spaces they believed were theirs. I imagined their faces, confusion, disbelief, then the slow realization that they had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted by someone they considered incapable. It was intoxicating, a thrill I hadn't felt in years. I also prepared contingencies. If my daughter questioned the legality of my actions, I had copies of documents ready. If my son tried to circumvent me, I had backup plans involving the city registry. Every potential objection they might have was countered in advance. My patience, my observation, my decades of knowledge about this house, all of it culminated in an airtight strategy. Finally, the stage was set. The basement no longer felt like punishment. It felt like headquarters. I had gathered all my weapons, legal, strategic, psychological, and I had trained myself in secrecy. The house itself, the very space they had tried to claim as their own, would be the instrument of their reckoning. And yet, I waited. I kept the smile hidden, the quiet calm maintained, because impatience could ruin everything. I wanted them to continue believing I was powerless, to continue underestimating me. Every careless laugh, every boast, every comment about my new quarters only added fuel to the fire. I let them dig their own holes, all while the blueprint of their undoing grew clearer in my mind. Soon, very soon, the moment would come when I would rise from the basement not as a defeated old man, but as the master of this home, the one who controlled every key, every lock, every room they had so arrogantly taken for granted. And when I did, they wouldn't just be surprised. They would finally understand what it means to underestimate the quiet ones. The day came like any other, quiet in the basement, the house above bustling with self-importance. I had waited patiently, biding my time while they flaunted their ignorance. Today, that ignorance would meet its reckoning. I checked my notes one last time, ensuring everything was in order. Legal documents? Verified? Copies ready? Check. Tools, locks, keys, all accounted for. And most importantly, their overconfidence? Still intact, still blind to what was coming? I ascended the stairs slowly, deliberately, the familiar creak of the steps announcing my arrival. They were in the living room, celebrating something trivial, clinking glasses, voices loud, laughter careless. I paused at the top, letting the sight sink in. My daughter adjusting the drapes, my son boasting about a recent minor victory in his work, my grandson scrolling on his phone, oblivious. They looked up, startled, and then curiosity turned into mild amusement. "What are you doing up here?" my daughter asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I smiled faintly, holding a stack of papers close to my chest. "Just checking on things," I said softly. Her eyes narrowed, sensing a subtle shift, but she didn't realize the storm was minutes away. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and changed the locks with precision. Each click echoed like a drumbeat of inevitability. Their laughter faltered. The realization began to creep in, but it was too late. They couldn't stop me. I had done my homework. Every potential countermeasure had been anticipated. I held the keys that controlled the entire house, the very spaces they had pushed me out of, and now I alone had access. "Wait!" my son started, reaching for the doorknob, only to find it unresponsive, his brows knitted in confusion. "What? Dad, what did you—" His voice broke mid-sentence. I held up the legal papers. "You've been treating me like I'm powerless for years, but apparently I was the one with the real power all along." The words hit harder than any confrontation could have. My daughter's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My grandson dropped his phone, stunned. Step by step, I guided them through the house, but not as usual. I showed them which rooms they could enter, which ones were now off limits. Their bedrooms, locked. The study with all their treasured electronics, locked. The kitchen, restricted to a single section. Each lock, each door, each barrier was a calculated echo of how they had restricted me to the basement. I let them feel the frustration, the helplessness I had endured. "Looks like you've been enjoying your new quarters, haven't you?" I said, walking past them to the upstairs balcony. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Every glance they cast at me was a mix of disbelief and dawning panic. They had thought shoving me to the basement would make me weak, compliant, invisible. Instead, I had turned the tables so completely that every inch of their comfort now depended on me. Then came the final quiet blow. I handed Mrs. Patel the keys to the storage rooms where they kept valuables, letting her act as a neutral witness. She locked certain spaces at my direction, and I watched as they realized their belongings, the things they had hoarded, were now outside of reach. Their self-importance crumbled in the face of precise, calculated justice. And yet I didn't gloat beyond what was necessary. Revenge, I knew, was most effective when it was clever, poetic, and unavoidable. They could curse, they could beg, they could plead, but it was all a lesson in humility and foresight. Each glance they shot me carried a mix of awe and regret, and I let it simmer. As the day ended, they moved through the house carefully, the weight of my control palpable. I returned to the basement later, not to hide, but to observe. Their world had shifted, the same world they had reshaped for me, but this time, the power lay firmly in my hands. Their arrogance, their thoughtlessness, and their belief in my incapacity had all contributed to their downfall. I sat quietly, thinking about how silence and patience had been more powerful than anger. By letting them underestimate me, I had created the perfect stage. By learning their habits, mapping their weaknesses, and preparing my actions in advance, I had orchestrated a symphony of subtlety and precision. And the best part? The lesson they would remember for years wasn't just about doors or keys, it was about respect, caution, and the danger of underestimating those you think are powerless. When night fell, I walked the halls one last time, hearing the quiet murmurs of my family, realizing the full extent of their situation. It was more satisfying than any argument, more complete than any confrontation. I had claimed my space back, reclaimed control, and in doing so, reminded them that age and silence are not signs of weakness. They are the tools of wisdom, strategy, and patience. And in that moment, as I looked out over the house I had always called home, I smiled. Not out of malice, but out of quiet satisfaction. They had learned, painfully and irrevocably, that the one you push aside can sometimes be the one who moves everything you care about completely out of reach. After the initial shock faded, a strange quiet settled over the house. My family moved carefully, constantly aware that their comfort now depended on my presence and my permission. I didn't need to shout or threaten. The lesson had already been delivered in the most effective way possible. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because I had made them suffer, but because I had reclaimed my dignity, my home, and my voice. The basement was no longer a prison. It had been my vantage point, my planning room, my quiet theater of justice. They would talk about that day for years, perhaps even regret the arrogance that led to it. And I returned to my routines with a light heart, knowing that respect is earned, not assumed, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply proving your worth when everyone else doubts it.